Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 209, the We're Still Freaking Out to Make Sure We Got Our Shopping Done edition. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm Alan Haley, and today is December 18th, 2015.
Well, I want to welcome Haley here. We're recording on a Saturday, so I don't know what his billable time on a... Do you do double time for billing on Saturday, Alan?
No.
Oh, good. So, we're going to talk about legal issues, and that's one of the reasons we have Alan on the show. Yes, he's the best looking person on the side of the camera, but he also knows lots of stuff about legal stuff, why you need a lawyer, when you need a lawyer, and when you don't need a lawyer. And there's been breaking news over at 815 2nd Avenue, or one of their side offices, about a hidden tape recorder found under a chair with the power on during one of the executive council meetings. And this has caused some heads to roll. 3 people were suspended, and I thought, well, I should call Alan to see if they really need a lawyer, if this is a lawyer type issue. Does it meet any criminal grounds? Is it a felony, a misdemeanor? Alan, what do you know?
Okay, well, first of all, we better not connect the two events so strongly. They have not officially said what was the reason for suspending Bishop C.C. Sauls, the chief operating officer of the church, and 2 of his subordinates. But the facts were, as you indicated, that at a recent executive council meeting in Maryland, during one of the sessions, there was found a tape recorder under the chairs of one of the attendants, of course. And if they have executive sessions in the executive council meeting, that means that nobody is supposed to be present to hear the deliberations except the council members themselves. So if somebody outside, like on the staff, wanted to follow what was going on in an executive session, a tape recorder would be the way to do it. And that would, yes, cause some legal problems and would require you to get a lawyer if you're charged with that kind of thing, because it's pretty much illegal to tape anybody without their consent in almost every state in the United States. In any event, it's also a lawyer thing because presiding bishop Michael Curry announced that he's engaged a law firm to look into this matter and investigate the facts and interview people before making any conclusions. And so meanwhile, the 3 Episcopal Church executives are on leave with pay.
Back in the day, they would just hire a gumshoe. Why do they use lawyers for investigations now?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's become where you have to protect yourself if you do an investigation because there's victims' rights as well as the prosecutors' rights. And so a law firm is the best way to make sure that you're keeping all your I's dotted and T's crossed. And hopefully it could also result in it's also pretty impregnable. In other words, you have an attorney-client privilege between the person hiring the law firm to investigate, and so they can't be forced to divulge anything elsewhere if they don't want to.
Worst case scenario?
Worst case scenario, well, it'll be the termination of those 3 individuals for illegally trying to record executive sessions of the Executive Council.
Does it have any criminal implications outside of the Episcopal Church?
Only if the DA in Maryland wants to prefer charges and if he has a willing complainant. So we'll have to see what the Episcopal Church does about that.
Cool. All right. So that's some good information about the Episcopal Church. We're going to talk about more stuff with the Episcopal Church. You wrote an interesting article on your blog, The Anglican Curmudgeon, last week that talked about what I want to call Episcopal cannibalism. They've spent the last 20, 30 years getting rid of all the conservatives, and all that's left to fight with now is each other. And, a lot of people said, well, now that the conservatives are gone, there'll just be peace and tranquility within the Episcopal Church. And on the West Coast, nothing could be further from the truth. We watched Bishop Brunel try to kick out a parish, sell St. John's the Great without their consent. sue the previous owner of the land. There's quite a mess going on in this cannibalism.
Right. It seems to be that the Episcopal Church, the Diocese of Los Angeles, has been given the gift of eternal litigation. Bishop Bruno had spent 9 years in the California courts suing departing parishes, 4 departing parishes, and eventually won all of the cases because of the Dennis Canon, which California officially recognizes in its statutes. And so it's it's a two-sided sword, though, because it cost all that money. He got the property back. He sold 2 of them to recoup something, but not very much. And then he was told the other 2 congregations, St. Luke's in the Mountains and St. James the Great in Newport Beach, that they could keep their buildings and continue. Well, then, a few months later, after having told the St. James congregation that, and they were working on building their numbers and getting their budget in line, he entered into a secret agreement with a friend of his, an old crony who was a real estate developer, and who had made him an offer to buy the St. James property for $15 million, which Bruno felt was about twice what it was worth. So he jumped at that chance, and then decided to tell the congregation about it about 4 months later, after coming to there for a parish visit and giving the sermon. He said, "Oh, by the way, your property is going to be sold, and you'll have to be out of here by the end of June of 2015. Well, that came as a tremendous shock to the congregation. Had no idea that this was anything like this in the works. At first, they tried to play, yes, okay, Bishop will do whatever you want. But then as they got into more the details of it, it got more and more outrageous, and it became a point of contention between the congregation, its vicar, the Canon Cindy Voorhees, who had done a great job in rehabilitating it and getting it going again, and the bishop. It became a power struggle, so to speak. He ordered them out at the end of June. At that point, however, he couldn't sell the property because what had happened, there surfaced a little glitch in the title, whereby the original donor of the property to the Episcopal Church, a company named the Griffith Company, had put in a reservation in its deed saying that the property is gifted to the church, but it must be used always for and exclusively for church purposes. So a developer is not free to just tear down the church buildings and put up luxury condos the way this plan imagined, given that restriction. And Bruno sort of said, we got rid of that restriction long ago. And Griffith said, not so fast.
Didn't Bruno sue them?
So he turned around and sued them for slander of title. And it's turned out that some very interesting things there. The deed, that there indeed was a reconveyance to the Episcopal Church of the use restriction by Griffith Company in 1984, but the deed removed that restriction on only 3 of the 4 St. James parcels on which the church sits. So there's still the main parcel in which there's the bulk of the body of the church itself, and obviously the church can't be torn down and that parcel used for anything but church purposes so long as that restriction's on it. Well, Bishop Bruno says, oh no, that was a typo. They meant to include all 4 parcels in 1984 because the rich, wealthy congregation, member of the congregation back then, paid the Griffith Company $800,000 for this reconveyance.
And they,
really?
And they have proof of this?
Well, that's the question. The parishioner who is no longer in that congregation, of course, having been kicked out by Bishop Bruno, he's in the Anglican congregation of St. James, but he says that was paid, but doesn't have a check. And then if you look at the deed that came back from Griffith Corporation to the Episcopal Church, it says a transaction tax is 0. Which means that there was no money paid for the transaction, and also the deed is titled gift deed. So these create some problems for it's going to tie up the title, I think, for quite some time. And meanwhile, Bishop Bruno, just out of spite, is keeping the parish locked out of its own church. No one can use it, and it's sitting there vacant, but they won't be able to use it. They've had to find alternate quarters, and for a while they were meeting across the street while the weather was good in the park. But
Well,
it can't be any fun at all. And and so they in turn have sued the bishop in court to prevent him from selling in violation of the restriction. And they've also brought Title IV charges against the bishop for essentially lying to them so many times about what he intended to do.
which will go nowhere and has gone nowhere.
No, it has gone, well, so far it went to conciliation, quote unquote, and the conciliator was unable to get the sides to come to any kind of reasonable agreement.
Surprise,
Bishop,
surprise, surprise. Yeah.
right? So it's now gone back to the conference panel, which is the next stage, which again will be an informal, come on, guys, can't we get this all together? And that'll take another couple of months.
Well,
And we'll see where it goes from there.
let's move quickly on to Chicago. Now, nobody's going to be surprised that the Episcopal Church uses mob tactics in Chicago, of all places. There's a parish there that decided to stay traditional, stay semi-orthodox, and I mean that in pre-1976 ways.
Anglo-Catholic, actually.
Anglo-Catholic ways. Back in 1976, the Episcopal Church said we're going to have women clergy, and if you don't agree with women clergy, we have a clause that allows you not to agree and not be punished for not agreeing. And it was kind of a wink, wink, nod, nod all through the times. And in the last 10 years, that clause has been forgotten, abused, and thrown out. And we now have this church in Chicago where all hell is broken loose because
It's
of
Church of the Ascension.
yeah.
As I say, it's the flagship Anglo-Catholic Church of the Diocese of Chicago, and had been going along for years with beautiful ceremonies and lots of incense and rituals and things like that, led by male priests. In 2014, the rector retired, and they got a new rector by the name of the Reverend Cobb, I believe it is Richard Cobb, and he was a disaster. He did not support the Anglo-Catholic program at all. He fired the two top musicians, the organist and the choir director. He, cut the budget for music services, paid choristers and so on, and just basically, all in all, tried to destroy the liturgy, and then bring in women assistant priests to serve the daily mass and so on. And so that caused such a strife with the vestry. It split the vestry. There were some who supported what he was doing, some who didn't, that Bishop Jeffrey Lee had to step in. And the result was negotiating a severance package for the Reverend Cobb in the six figures. He departed once they gave him six figures. And a new interim priest was hired. And that interim priest tried to stitch the pieces together, but valiantly over the last 12 months or so, but he also now has tendered his resignation because the factions continue to fight so much. So how to take a perfectly functioning, beautiful church and tear it apart? Once again, we see there's nobody who can do it like the Episcopalians.
Well, as long as I got you on, the biggest news always report on are the Supreme Court cases around the country. What's the calendar look like? What's going to come up this year?
Okay, well, probably the first thing that's going to happen is we'll hear from the Supreme Court of South Carolina. Mm-hmm. I expect it by the end of the year, and it maybe not, then maybe the first weeks of the new year, because Chief Justice Toll of that court is retiring at the end of this year, and it's customary to get all your opinions out before you retire. In any event, we'll see. That should be the first thing on the calendar. And then the next thing after that will be probably the case in San Joaquin will be heard before the Court of Appeals there in Fresno.
Well, you're on that case, right?
Yes, right. Okay. That'll be in February or March probably. Mm-hmm. And then the case in Fort Worth will be heard before the Court of Appeals there. So we'll have two oral arguments and resulting in two more decisions coming out sometime in 2016. So we should have finally settled by 2016 the legal issue of whether a diocese can freely leave the church or not. So far, as I say, that's what was held in Quincy, and that's what's held in all the lower courts except San Joaquin. in the other three cases. So we will see how it turns out. It's going to be very interesting.
Now, depending on your schedule and how bored you are, you often write a year in review. Yeah.
Yes.
Are you going to do one again this year for Curmudgeon?
Yeah, I do a annual litigation summary for the Episcopal Church, and I would like to include the South Carolina result in that, so I may wait until that comes out.
Okay. Well,
yeah, and I try to also add up how much money the Episcopal Church has spent so far in litigation. And of course, it's winding down now, but it's interesting. It appears to be that they are continuing the same level of support from 815 as before. That is, Bishop Curry has made no changes. The attorneys filing on the briefs in the various court cases are still the same attorneys that they were under the presiding Bishop Jeffrey Shorey.
Do you find it interesting that he did not employ David Booth Beers' law firm in this investigation?
Well, no, that's what I mean. He still is.
Oh,
they haven't changed attorneys yet.
Oh, I thought they did change attorneys. Huh?
Well, nothing that as far as the courts are concerned.
Okay,
yeah, everything that's being filed is still under the Goodwin Proctor name with David Booth Beers, and it's just Mary Costel who was the in-house counsel.
They must get a discount per lawsuit. That's how it works. Alan,
Oh yeah.
I want to thank you